Right now, we're going to move on to our last speaker of the day, and that is Fabian Sperka, Vehicles Policy Manager for Transport and Environment. Transport and Environment is Europe's leading clean transport campaign group, and you guys have quite an impressive resume when it comes to pushing for cleaner transport. Just one example, you had your hand in the EU member states deciding to end the sales of new combustion engine cars and vans by 2035. But that is not what we're talking about today, though there is a little bit of a correlation. Fabian, you are looking at the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation, specifically at the fleet-based target, which says that the number of charging stations and available power or charging power must grow proportionate to the uptake of light electric vehicles. Fabian, how are the EU member states holding up?
Well, that's what I'm going to present you, Clara. And maybe I start right away. But first of all, thanks for this, the opportunity to speak here. Just a quick introduction of transport and environment, although, Clara, you already mentioned it, that we are Europe's leading NGO when it comes to the decarbonization of the transport sector. So we are actually 120 people now. Our headquarters is in Brussels, but we have also national offices in Germany, Italy, France, Spain, the UK, and Poland. And we're not only focusing on cars, on electric cars, but also on the road freight transport sector. We have a sustainable finance team. We work on policies such as the emission trading schemes in Europe, obviously on shipping and aviation. But we also have a team that looks into the energy that is used in transport in broader terms, and especially on biofuels and e-fuels, and where they should be used, for what transport mode they should be used. But today, I'm going to present you an analysis that we have just published this morning. So this is just for you to actually being able to download it, but it comes later in the last slide as well. And in this analysis, we did mostly three things. One was to look at the status quo of the charging infrastructure deployment in Europe and in some member states in detail. Then we looked at how this charging infrastructure deployment fares compared to the AFIR target that we are projected member states need to fulfill by the end of this year already, because the AFIR entered into force last Saturday. And then finally, and this is also then the closing of the presentation, some recommendations of how we think member states could kind of improve the already relatively ambitious alternative fuel infrastructure regulation when they implement it in their country. So first of all, the number of chargers is still growing quite significantly. So there is a total threefold increase of the number of charging points since 2020, and we're already further now because we're already in Q1 of this year. What is also quite significant is that the number of fast chargers is growing even faster, especially in the last 2 years. And of course, we still don't have the perfect network that is needed by 2030 when we really have a lot of EVs on the road. But what is clear is that charging infrastructure is growing, and it's growing fast. And actually, it's growing faster, relatively speaking, at the moment than the EV fleet. And this, what you see here on the right graph, is just the number of actual charging points. If we would boil this down to the number of publicly available charging power, so really like, because we have more fast chargers now than we have more and more fast chargers, then this growth would be even more significant. Here just some deep dive for some countries. So like the number of chargers in France is growing also almost exponentially, one could say. Then similar in Germany, here what is most noteworthy is really the massive expansion of the fast charging network in the past 2 years. And then also they are often so-called laggards, Spain, but also Italy, are actually doing quite good. And also in our analysis, we figured out that if you compare Spain and Italy and their market uptake level to the situation where France and Germany were a couple of years ago, then the ratio between the installed charging infrastructure and the vehicles on the road is actually better now in Spain and Italy than used to be in France and Germany. Then, just a recap. What is AFIR? So what did we actually look here? So AFIR is a regulation, not a directive. Why is that important? A regulation is directly applicable in all member states of the EU and doesn't need to be implemented first into national law. Of course, it can still be enhanced and changed in national law, but the main elements are applicable right now. And there is this, what Clara mentioned already, this fleet-based methodology per country that ensures that the uptake of the deployment of charging infrastructure always needs to be in line with the uptake of EVs in a country. Not so relevant for this analysis now, but for us as TNE, very important also that there are mandatory targets for truck charging, for dedicated truck charging pools, actually, which is really like a game changer, and it's something that doesn't exist in any other comparable region in the world. Again, all targets are binding, so member states need to fulfill them, which is completely different from the law that was previously enforced, the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive. And then also the time frame is really quite ambitious, because the first infrastructure targets itself will kick in at the end of this year, and member states need to fulfill them. So then just a deep dive about the targets. So one main target is the distance-based target, and this is the whole TNT network. I saw before also a map. I'm not sure exactly what presentation it was, but these were only the corridors. But actually, AFIR requires member states to build charging infrastructure every 60 kilometers along this whole TNT road network you see here. There is a slight distinction between the core network, so the bold lines, and the comprehensive network, which are the thinner red lines here. And then the target is a bit separated, because the core network needs to be fully equipped with charging pools, locations, hubs, however you want to call them, by 2025. But the minimum power output needs to be increased by 2030. Then for the comprehensive network, so for the remaining roads, 50% of the remaining roads need to be covered by 2027. And then full coverage of the entire TNT network needs to be in place by 2030. Then again to the fleet-based target, and this is for us really the most significant change to what used to be there, because it is a way, whether it really completely solves it, that's the question, but it is a way to really break this chicken and egg logic, because you have CPOs saying, okay, OEMs need to provide EVs because otherwise our infrastructure is not used, and OEMs that are saying, okay, without charging infrastructure, no one is buying our cars. And what AFIR is actually doing is saying it doesn't matter, because everything needs to come at the same time and in the same in a relation that it actually works. And this is what this mechanism, or this fleet-based target, is ensuring. Again, this target is a bit split, because there is a target for battery electric vehicles, 1.3 kilowatt per registered BEV in a member state, and 0.8 kilowatt for a plug-in electric vehicle. And then there is also this provision that member states can opt out. So it's not obligatory, but they can opt out of this target after the share of battery electric vehicles in the total light-duty vehicle fleet in their country hits 15%. And the reasoning behind that is that after that, the charging market is mature enough, so any further demand could be fully satisfied by the market. So what did we do here? And this is probably also the most important slide. So we have internal uptake projections of EVs in all European countries that are more ambitious than what the CO2 standards at the European level demand from OEMs. So what you see here is already a bit more ambitious than what is absolutely necessary at EU level. And we compared now what member states need to fulfill. This is always the 100% you see here in the slide, need to fulfill at the end of every year now. And then compared this to the actual deployment that is in place. And the results are, quite surprising. So for this year, almost all, not almost all, but most EU member states are already compliant with AFIR, with what they had installed at the end of 2023. Obviously, some countries, the ones you see in black on the column for 2024, still need to catch up. For some, it might be a bit more tricky, but overall, we think it's all doable. What is also surprising is that, Bulgaria is the sole leader in this ranking. And that is, but if you think about it, it's not really surprising, because in Bulgaria, there are a number of fast charging hubs, but Bulgaria itself has only a couple of thousand EVs registered, meaning obviously that it's relatively easy to fulfill their AFIR target. And because also our internal projections show still a relatively slow uptake of mostly battery electric cars in Bulgaria up until 2030, it might be even possible that the charging infrastructure that Bulgaria has now is almost sufficient up until 2030, according to AFIR. But for most other countries, as you see here, so in 2025, you see already most countries are not compliant anymore. And in 26, it's only 2 countries where the charging infrastructure is already sufficient compared to what needs to be achieved under AFIR. Then I want to dive in a little bit on what we think member states should consider when implementing AFIR. So one thing we all know, and it was also mentioned in other presentations, grids can be a problem. And they will be especially a problem because we know the demand, the energy demand, and then also the charging demand of electric vehicles is, it's going to explode. And it's also what many people still haven't really fully internalized is that there is also a significant additional demand coming from heavy-duty vehicles, which puts even more strain on the grid. And what we think is really that we need some kind of forward-looking planning, how exactly this may look like, whether you want to have a public tender or whether you want to change the grid planning at national level, etc. That's a bit up for the member states, but we need to really make sure that we plan ahead, because otherwise we could run into problems, especially after 2030, when really huge grid connection capacities are needed at certain locations that are simply not available. And then upgrading the grid can take up to a couple of years. And of course, no one really wants this bottleneck to block the whole transition to electromobility. What we also think was a bit of a shortcoming of AFIR is that the gaps, especially in the TNT network, are not closed earlier, because we think it's time really that we say at latest in 2025, so by the end of next year, there needs to be at least one charging point, or at least one charging point every 60 kilometers along the TNT network, so the major European roads, because this gives the signal to basically every EV driver or prospective EV driver that they can go wherever they want in Europe. And maybe the infrastructure is not completely sufficient yet, and you maybe have to wait, but at least you can be sure that every 60 kilometers you're going to find a charger, and you're not stranded in the middle of nowhere. One other idea would be to also expand this target to other national roads that have a lot of traffic but are not part of the TNT network, because also these roads, of course, exist. Then what is also an idea we tell member states is that to ensure a more homogeneous rollout of AFIR, it would be ideal to break the fleet-based target down to regional or even provincial level, because at the moment, this fleet-based target is a national target, meaning in theory, you can put all the chargers in one place in your country, maybe where you have most EVs at the moment, etc., and you fulfill it. But obviously, then you leave some regions behind. But by breaking down this fleet-based target to regional and provincial level, you make sure that the demand for charging infrastructure and the uptake of EVs are more in line. So this is just one example here, what we did for Italy, how this could be implemented. Then this goes without saying, we urge member states to actually apply the other requirements in AFIR as soon as possible. So most importantly, enable ad hoc payment everywhere, because this is and can still be a problem, especially for people that then don't have a subscription or charging subscription, to apply the interoperability requirements as soon as possible. We also would like to see something like a minimum uptime requirement for publicly available charging infrastructure, because quite often nowadays chargers are counted towards national or European targets, and they are available, but quite often they are just out of order. No one really knows why. And we think it would make sense that CPOs need to guarantee a certain uptime per year. And then finally also implement the measures for price transparency as soon as possible. When it comes to public funding, we think it should be as simple as possible, so really limit red tape. Then have harmonized EU guidelines, ideally for grid connection procedures, because at the moment you have, I think, 2,500 DSOs across Europe. And as a CPO, if you talk to them, every DSO can ask for different admin procedures, etc. So it's a huge bureaucratic hassle that slows down the deployment. And finally, member states should really focus funding at locations where the market doesn't really provide charging infrastructure, but where charging infrastructure is necessary to kind of close the gap. But there is no business case yet. And this is where member states should really focus their public funding. So this is just a summary of all the ideas we would like member states to take into account. And then I thank you for your attention. And these are my contact details. And also, again, the QR code to the analysis I just showed you. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabian. That was very interesting. I have one question about you saying that the fleet-based targets should be broken up into more regional, for regions and not as a national fleet-based target. Do you think there is or do you think you actually need a cap when you say, okay, it's enough charging infrastructure, or is there even such a thing as too much charging infrastructure in your view?
I mean, there is this, I think this 15% cap that actually exists for the fleet-based target at national level can equally be used then at regional or provincial level. And indeed, yeah, I think so. What our approach is that so member states need to kind of make sure that there is a ramp up of charging infrastructure to have a backbone network. But once you have a relative comprehensive coverage of charging infrastructure everywhere, like whatever comes on top on additional demand, and then like when the fleet is growing, this should be mostly market-based. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Fabian. Don't go anywhere because we are just moments away from our panel talk with all our guests. So you guys behind the screens, this is your last chance to ask questions in the chat. Please make sure to note for whom the question is for. Like I said, we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.